Vicky Bikes. We finally did it. We finally did it. We got this. As we were just saying before I hit record, we met, for context, we met in Dakla, Western Sahara, best place I've ever been to. We met there last April. And at the time, my girlfriend, Heidi, said to me, you should really get Vicky on the podcast. And as I was saying, I was very lazy. So I'm glad we're less. Yeah, it's not quite taken me a year, but it's taken me a long time. But I'm very, very pleased you're here. And yeah, thank you for being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for asking me. Yeah, and time things come around when they're meant to. It's,
yes, exactly. Time.
No point ever rushing anything.
No, absolutely. And time is also mildly terrifying that it's been nearly a year since that trip. I feel like it was yesterday still.
I know, it's crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah.
But then you have to do like that gratitude thing of actually sit down and think what we've both done and achieved and accomplished within that time. And then suddenly you go, okay, all right then. Yeah, it's fine.
That's a good point, actually. It's so easy. People are so quick to do the whole life is so short and where does the time go and all this. But sometimes actually I'm like, whilst life is short, and you know, when it's horrible when you hear someone dying and things like that, and it does make you do that. It does make you go, God, life is short. But at the same time, like when you say it like that, I don't think we give ourselves credit enough for things like that. You know, if I actually do sit down and go, what have I done in the last 10 months? I'm like, there's at least 5 things that I can be like, pat on the back, Sandy, well done. But I don't do that. Instead I go, oh crap, where's the time gone? What about, you know? I think it's very easy to kind of have that negative confirmation when you think like that, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I mean, I've got a funny one. My birthday's coming up. I'm going to turn 48. My kids are approaching sort of significant birthdays. So like my son's about to turn 20. Cece's just turned 17. My parents are beginning to get a bit sort of older and more unwell and things, and various people have died. And so I've been like, shit, where the hell has the last 20 years gone? But then when I actually sit down and I sort of thought about it, and I thought, well, is there any way I could live my life differently at the moment to make the most of every second? And it's like, no, I can't. So therefore I have to accept that time is going to pass, and I just have to extend the gratitude to sort of thinking about and enjoying and relishing what we're doing with our days and our time. And I actually found that quite reassuring. It's still scary getting older, but it makes you appreciate it far more.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, they say I think this is a quote from The Office, but I'm sure it's from something far more intelligent. But it's you never, I wish there was a way to know that you're in the good old days before you're after you've left them. And it's funny. I remember like my first couple of seasons teaching windsurfing, I was like, whilst I was kind of enjoying it, you're also kind of yearning for that sort of turning 18 and finishing school and things like that when I was sort of 19, 20. And then when I get a bit older, I'm like, oh, I wish I was back kind of just doing seasons and not caring and things like that. And it's only really now that I'm starting to be like, nah, you're doing all right, mate. That was a good time. And now this is a new time and we've got new things to focus on. But it's bloody hard to get to that point, you know?
It is. It is. It is. But it's all, we're lucky. We're healthy. It's
absolutely. I realize we completely skipped this, Vicky. Can you just briefly introduce yourself to the audience? Tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of what you do.
Yeah, so I am Vicky. I'm founder of Vicky Bikes. So basically, for going right back, I used to work in PR. We lived in London. I was never particularly happy. Had 2 children. I had prenatal and then postnatal depression with my son, and then so my whole sort of anxiety journey, my mental health journey started a long way back. And that's important because then when our daughter Cece was born, we found that, I'd just been made redundant at work, which I was fighting the legal battle over that until literally the week before she was born. Then she was born and we found that actually she was disabled. And our son had life-threatening allergies from birth. So I'd sort of waltzed into my GP and sort of said, oh yeah, she's great. And GP said no. So anyway, long story short, I spent 12 years as a stay-at-home mum, and really just became my whole identity. I was sort of a wife, a mum, our kids had various problems, and about 6 years ago I really began to lose it. And so at the same time I discovered mountain biking, and I decided to train as a bike mechanic, and then I've now gone on, I now write about mechanics. I'm a writer, I'm a speaker, I teach bike mechanics, and Vicky Bikes is very much about sort of teaching mindful mechanics, this idea that actually when you learn to fix your bike, you're fixing yourself as well. So yeah, sorry, that's a very slightly all over the place. You will have to bear with me. I am perimenopausal, and I haven't started the HRT yet, and my brain fog is slightly bonkers. So yeah, which is the whole other bit of an important thing to talk about, but maybe not right now.
Well, that's that goes back to what we were saying. That's time. You know, you realize you're in that phase of your life, and you know, I mean, this is one of the things with this podcast, and one of the reasons why also I'm so interested to talk to you, because I'll never know this, because I'll never be a stay-at-home mom. I might be a stay-at-home dad one day. You know, and that's actually one place that I'd really like to start with. Obviously, I've met your kids when we were there. I met Cece, who, you know, I don't know if whether we latched onto her or she latched onto us, but we had a great week hanging out with her.
It was mutual.
In April. Yeah, a complete joy of a joy, you know, a ray of light and stuff. But I can imagine, you know, being a stay-at-home mum and looking after her all the time, and Henry as well, and all this. I imagine my mum was a stay-at-home mum for quite a few years as well. And I can imagine it's difficult. And one thing I've always wondered with it is, do you think there's a bit of societal pressure from everyone has to succeed and be a CEO these days? Do you think that affects people being stay-at-home mums and feeling like they shouldn't do that, when actually, realistically, that's a more valuable and harder job than anybody else? Did that play into you, you know, having mental troubles at all, or is that a thing?
No, I think it is a thing. I think it's, and definitely, so I was at school and uni and growing up and things through the sort of, well, I was born mid-70s, so through the 80s and early 90s. And it was very much women could have it all. And nobody sort of actually sat down and said, well, okay, they can have it all, but something has to give. So I think partly the societal thing. And I remember the day that I actually started getting carers allowance for looking after Cece, I suddenly felt validated. I felt seen. And this is a tiny amount of money, but it was literally somebody saying, well, you have a role. So yes, I think there is, but I think it is hard, but I think it's more just actually the role of a carer. You are literally putting other people's lives ahead of yours, and you just get lost, and it becomes habit for everyone in the household. So it's sort of like, well, you're the one at home, therefore you cook the food, you go to the supermarket, if I need something in the middle of the day, I phone you and you drop everything and do it. And it's soul destroying. It's really soul destroying. And then if you add in, so Henry had he was undiagnosed autistic, and he really struggled as a child, really struggled. So ironically, I had Cece, whose needs were far greater, but she was in a school that was right for her, whereas for a long time Henry wasn't. And actually, funnily enough, me discovering mountain biking and retraining as a mechanic coincided with him changing to a local school it was rough, but it was amazing, and it taught him so much. And suddenly it de-escalated everything, because they looked after everything rather than me getting phone calls. I mean, he always jokes, I do have PTSD from getting a school phoning me to say, pick up your son, or do this or do that or whatever. And it was just, so there's a lot of things that sort of contributed to it. I don't know if a stay-at-home mum of neurotypical kids without any problems, maybe they, who aren't married to a doctor who's working ridiculous hours, maybe they would be fine. I don't know, but for me, it was just kryptonite. It just didn't, it really, and I really had to break down for it to rebuild, and thankfully we've rebuilt it. So,
well, that's a fairly common theme with everybody I've spoken to who has had all manner of, mental health struggles, is and including myself, I needed to hit that point where I'm on the phone to my mum in tears being like, I don't want to be here anymore, to then be able to get to where I am now, where I still have bad days and things like that. But now, I've always said what was a bad month became a bad week, became a bad day, became a bad morning, and that's through largely awareness. But I very much needed to get to the bottom first, which I think can sometimes be a tough pill to swallow for people. And I don't necessarily think everybody has to do it, but there's definitely a correlation there, because everybody I've spoken to who's had struggles have said the same thing. So it's interesting that you've said that as well. And to be honest, with the people I've had on the podcast so far, you are, I'll hold my hands up and say I haven't had that many women on the podcast, not out of choice, but just the people I've been speaking to. And largely it's me coming from a men's mental health point of view, but now I'm kind of really trying to open that up. So it's very interesting that you, who are fairly dramatically different circumstances to other guests, yet there's still a correlation there, which is interesting. We're all far more similar than we think we are, I think.
Oh gosh, it's and that's I love the connections between people, and that, I think that was one of the things that when we met you guys, I really felt was this wonderful connection, that despite all the differences in our lives, there was just this humanity that connected us, and that was brilliant. And I love it, absolutely love it.
When you were, I suppose this is a silly question to ask, but when you were, a stay-at-home mum and things, before you discovered mountain biking, did you have anything in your life that you kind of liked doing just for yourself, or was there simply not time for that?
Yeah, I did. I loved sewing. So I'm a dressmaker as well. So awesome. I still enjoy it. But actually, one of the things I realized that has come in the sort of the 6 years since then, and since the mountain biking and so on, is I feel like almost I've gone back to who I was as a youngster, and that side of me has come alive. And I actually realized that part of the problem when I was staying at home was I was trying to be somebody I wasn't. I was trying to fit into so many other sort of niches that I really wasn't, and it was just so, and because of our kids, we didn't fit in. We were quite isolated, or we were very isolated socially and so on. And it was very, very lonely. And so I was constantly trying to compare myself and change myself to be like the people around me. And it didn't work. And I think it was that freedom to go. And I remember it so clearly, the moment I felt the bike shift under me when I first started mountain biking. And we were in Greece on holiday, and I felt the bike skid, and I suddenly felt this awakening of who I'd been as a teenager. And I was like, she's who I need. That's who I need to be. And it still progressed. I still sort of got worse from there, but I clung on to that girl and got back to her. So yeah, it is interesting. So yes. So, and now I still sew, but I do different kinds of sewing.
Yeah.
So it's, yeah.
That is that's really, and that's another thing that's so common as well, is you kind of people get away from their kind of interest and stuff, because there seems to be this thing where hobbies are only for children, because once you're an adult, you should be too busy to have a hobby and things. And actually, I think that's where so many people struggle, is because they have that kind of childlike enthusiasm for something essentially taken away from them, whether it is sewing, or perhaps that even like just guys going out and playing five-a-side football, where they did it when they're kids and now they don't. And like when I worked in a leisure centre for a few years in between me doing seasons as a windsurfing instructor, I used to see these guys come in and play football, and they're doing it. I've got no interest in football, hate the whole culture of everything. I mean, it's rubbish. But I saw them, and then they'd leave, and they're all sweating, they're carrying the ball, and they all look so happy. And I'm like, it's funny reflecting on it now, and I'm like, that was really cool. It was awesome. Yeah. And I think so many, and it's also really sad that I wonder sometimes, do they go home and do they get shit from their partner for going out and doing that, or going and doing this? And sometimes I'm like, that it's such a shame if they do, because I feel like everyone should be given some time from loved ones, from work, from everything, to go and pursue something they enjoy. I'm not saying they have to go and do it every day, but I think that's a huge part of my, not to make it about myself, but talking from my experience is like, for me, having windsurfing as like a thing through my mental health, everything, I knew if I saw like some good lines on the forecast, I was like, here we go. And
Yeah.
I knew that I knew that day I could just get out of my head. And I think
Yes.
people just don't have that.
Yeah.
And with that, can you tell me a bit more about how, you know, this moment you said where the back wheel skid out, and I imagine you kind of had this like childlike bit of adrenaline where you're like, that was fun.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. So yeah, because I grew up sailing.
right.
Every holiday was sailing. As we got bigger, the boats got bigger. Eventually, we were crossing the channel. We were just, and so I had a very, very low-key holidays, and it was very free and just out in nature the whole time. It was brilliant. And I would cycle to my boat and things right from on my own from a young age. I had a lot of freedom and independence. And I raced dinghies, and I'd got into sailing lasers because so when I was young, girls weren't allowed to sail lasers. That was it. It was not a class for girls because we were overpowered. They'd put boys our age in weight vests, but they wouldn't put girls in them. And then, so when I came back to, I know, I can see your face. It's like, this is the 80s. It was bonkers. We were given toppers. Boys had lasers. Right. But then they developed the radial rig. So on holiday, It was great. I could suddenly start sailing a laser, and it had a radial rig. And I would wait till it was on the cusp of them closing the beach. And I'd be like, right, that's it. I'm going sailing now. I want the adrenaline. I was all about the adrenaline. And then we tried sailing as a family, but we now live in Kent, and it's very, very tidal, and sort of estuaries and things. So basically the sailing club that we were going to join, because it was a proper family club, you were expected to do race duty and galley duty and all of this. And then Al, my husband, plays competitive tennis. So I worked out that for me to actually, I would only be able to, with the tides and all my duties and Al doing his thing, I would actually go sailing once every 3 months. I was just like, well, that's not going to work.
No.
So that was why when I felt this bike go, I was like, oh, this is the same as planing. This feels like planing on a laser, and I can do this within 10 minutes. I don't need to go off for a whole day. I don't need to wait for the tide. I don't need to wait for all of this. So so that was basically where that sort of adrenaline started coming from. And I was like, it was the combination of being able to get the high that I was seeking, get the freedom, reconnect with my youth, and be able to do it all just like that without having to wait for anything. That was perfect. Yeah,
that's awesome. And I think I remember we spoke about it when we were together last year. And we talked a little bit about mountain biking. And for me, I've got loads of friends that do it, and they're obsessed with it. I think it is one of those things that, you know, people who do water sports and that do depend on conditions, there's kind of a few sports that all my friends seem to have found, and they are climbing, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, or mountain biking. And that's what everyone seems to have found, purely because you don't need that many things to line up, and, you know, you can walk to it. But those that go mountain biking, for me, I'm like, I just don't think I'm up for it. I'm not willing to fall. I don't want to cycle into a tree. I don't want to do all this. But I think you've also written posts about it on your Instagram and things, about how it's not all about kind of being super extreme and like taking it to the highest level. And because a lot of the time, and this is, I think, a big problem with extreme sports and action sports, is because of the very nature of the sport, the high end of the sport anyway, it alienates 90% of people, because they're like, I don't want to go down a rock, you know, a cliff on a bike, you know.
Totally.
And then they can't, and then you can't relate to the athletes you watch doing it, because you're like, well, that's just nuts, I'm not interested. Whereas you watch someone throwing a basketball into a hoop from far away, you're like, I might be able to do that one day, and I don't have to risk my life to do it. So as you've progressed in the sport, and then you know, and please do start going into what you do at Mindful Mechanics, and I love what you said there about fixing it and fixing yourself and things. But before that, tell me a little bit about your relationship with that kind of extreme side of the sport, and how you've navigated that.
Yeah, so and this is, I'm really glad you asked about it, because it's something that I've tried to, that I wrestle with. So I wrestle a lot with social media and things, because it shows it's far easier to get a really wow photo of somebody doing a gap jump, or the kind of extreme things you're talking about, and they're all very man-made, they're easy places to get to. So for me, so the kind of mountain biking I love is very much natural, techie terrain, fairly steep. I love steep stuff. I don't have that much of it locally, but I like really natural steep tech. It's backcountry, it's just getting out there.
Yeah.
But it's not very easy to photograph. It doesn't look particularly attractive. Somebody would look at you, and the way the camera flattens everything, it doesn't look that impressive. So I do have this real thing about the fact that I want people to see that you don't have to go and do gap jumps and so on. And it's really interesting, because now that I'm learning to wing foil, it's really similar. It's sort of, I tried kite surfing, I've tried gap jumps. Neither of them are for me. Because I know there are people who find the kind of riding that I do scary, but actually I'm very much more in control. So it is all about control for me. So yes, I'm going down something really techie and steep, but I've taken a lot of time to learn the skills so that I know how to move my body, move the bike, control the bike. But it's not about just send it. I'm not a just send it rider, and that's probably why the kite surfing didn't work for me, whereas the wing foiling does. But it's so I am an extreme sports person, but I'm probably an extreme sports person in a very controlled way. I still get that buzz, and it's about sort of doing something that completely takes control of your mind, and you have to focus on. And that's probably actually where the gap jumps, there's that time in the air where I'm not completely absorbed in the process, and that might be part of the issue why I don't like them. But
having I imagine you're going down something super steep, you can't then stop to think about your problems as well, think about what happened yesterday, things like that. You do have to be so focused. I think that's what's so wonderful about all these different sports. And then also what you mentioned very, very briefly there about actually being out in nature, and I don't know what there is to it. There's something to it. For me, it's the sea, but I know people get it from the mountains. People get it, you get it from the being out in the trails and up the hill and things like that. There's something about, looking out there. Even when you're sitting in the sea. I did a podcast with a woman called Easky Britton, who's an Irish big wave surfer.
Yes, I've read her book.
Brilliant.
I love her. She's amazing.
Yeah. So I had her.
So cool.
Yeah, I had her on the podcast a couple of years ago, and she talked a lot about, obviously surfing related, but she talked a lot about the space between the waves. And actually that's where you find the most kind of peace and satisfaction, and that's where the magic really is. Actually, it's not about you kind of catching the wave and the thrill of you riding the wave. It's when you paddle back out after, and you're just sitting there on your board, and you're like, this is the magic bit. And that stuck with me ever since she said that to me. And I've applied it not just to surfing, but even windsurfing for me. And without being too kind of ego, the certain level I've reached with windsurfing and the tricks and stuff, just sailing along doesn't really do it for me. I'm kind of sailing along to set up the next trick. But even, since she said that, now I kind of, even when I'm just sailing along and I look around and my mates are sailing, I try and get into my brain to be like, this is still pretty good. This is still all right. And I try, it's a constant battle for me, especially now, because I have reached a certain level. I beat myself up when I don't perform to that level. And I wonder whether that happens with you, because I know you said with the techie stuff, and I'm quite fascinated by the fact that when we do improve at something, our expectations of success change with our level, So I imagine the first time you went mountain biking, you probably went along a road and maybe up a little hill and down a little hill, and you were like, it was amazing. Whereas now, perhaps if you're teaching someone, you might still get a bit of a thrill, but if you were to just do it yourself, you'd probably be like, this is not did I really come out all the way for this? Or maybe you did. I wonder whether you can speak to that.
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting because actually, so with my mental health journey, what I've done a lot of the time is begun to notice my negative thought patterns and things like that. And actually, this is where I now recognize that when I get that dissatisfied feeling, or if I'm not progressing, because yes, one of the reasons I do the sports I do is because I love learning, and I have this thirst to progress. I always want to, there's always something. And I've, like you say, I've come to terms with the fact that it's healthy for me to have a goal that I'm constantly working towards. I know that the minute I stop having a goal, I might as well give up the sport because there's no drive. And it's so yeah, so there is that negative, you get that negative thought process, and you get that sort of, oh, I didn't do that so well or whatever. But then I flip it on its head and I say, well, a year ago, how did you feel about that feature? Or how did you, and that's where actually with local trails, okay, the conditions can change, but they pretty much stay the same. And our local trails are quite gentle, they're fun. I love them because they're my home trails, but some people might come and ride them and go, well, this isn't much, is it? But I adore them. But I look at it and go, well, I'm still working towards that, or I'd like to do that a bit better. And a year ago, that really terrified me. And it's, yeah, so I think you have to start noticing, like Iski's saying, you have to start noticing, when is it a broken thought pattern, and when is it when is it actually, do you know what, this is pretty good, and I'm out with my friends, or I'm out on my own, I'm in nature, I've got this bike. It's so I think there are definitely ways around it, but yeah, of course there are always days when you're like, oh, just this is pointless. But I normally don't actually end up out the house when it's like that. I'll have not gone out the front door to go for a ride, because it's like, oh well, the only place I can go is the local, I can't be bothered. And that's daft. But
and often it's days like that where you don't want to go the most, that actually you leave with the most satisfaction, which is there's definitely something there. But you definitely do. I've listened to loads of people talk about it, in that you literally do have to like rewire your brain to get rid of these negative thought patterns. You do it's like muscle memory, when if you learn to do something with your body, and then you realize you've been doing it wrong, whether it's a tennis serve or something like that, and you go, oh shit, I've been doing it wrong, and then you almost have to, I think it's a Yoda quote, you've got to unlearn you must unlearn what you have learned. So you've got to kind of unlearn that, and I think you've got to do that with your brain as well. You do have to reset the kind of chemicals, whatever they're doing in there. You have to go, right, no, actually we're not going to take this route, we need to come back and realize, look around, take stock. And I think breathing, well, for me, breathing helps a lot with that, is actually taking a minute and just like closing my eyes and just a couple of deep breaths, realize where you are.
I've learnt breath work, I've done a lot of this year, and it's really it's amazing. It's transformed everything. I really love sort of conscious breath work. It's about teaching, especially those of us with mental health problems. I mean, my brain just goes into like spiral free fall or whatever, and just taking it back to the breath, it engages your parasympathetic nervous system, so it does calm you, but it also just gives you one thing. And when I was really, really ill, I remember Al saying to me, all you have to try and do is one thing a day. That's it. If that thing is putting your clothes on, fine, you've done it. You've achieved it. And it's sort of just one thing. That's all. And it's the same with the breath. I think it's just that calming thing of, all I have to do is focus on my breath. And when my mind wanders, I come back, and that breath will keep going. But yes, it is. It's really important.
Well, it can, for me, like as well, it brings you back to your body. Like when I get really anxious and stuff, I start doing this with my hands. For anyone listening, which is all of you, I kind of start like rubbing my hands together like this.
Me too.
I kind of do that and things, and then, but it becomes like automatic, where it's subconscious. I don't really know I'm doing it. So then, if I kind of almost snap a little bit, and I go, oh, I realize what I'm doing, and then I go, right, big deep breath, and I'm like, oh right, so that's, you know, Sandy kind of comes back in, and I'm
Yeah.
like, all right, cool, right, now how do I sort of go about this and get myself normal? I've talked a lot about it recently. I bought a pair of I have a pair of AirPod Pros headphones, and they're like they're my thing. I'm like, right, cool, put them in noise cancellation, and I'll put the book I'm listening to on, or put a song on or something, and kind of sit and breathe for a minute, and I'm like, right, cool, I come back to myself, and then, as you said, then I can go, right, you know, whatever simple task that's made me have a bit of a meltdown, I can be like, right, I can then go back to that. And I love that. I love that's what Al said. And that was something that I was also doing when I was really struggling as well, where I was and even now, sometimes I do it if I'm having a shit day or anything. I do kind of go, right, let's go back to like the base achievements of what I can achieve, what I can do today, you know. And I start, and it's just one bit at a time, you know. And I've started doing it with work now. If I have a bad day, I think I posted about it the other day. I was like, someone asked me a question saying, you know, motivation, what do you do, and things like that. And more recently, I'm like, I'm just going to send one email, and then I can finish for the day. But usually after I've sent that one email, I'm like, oh, productive, tick something off the list, and I'm like, maybe I'll send another one. And I do that, and I'm like, cool. And then before I know it, it's 5 o'clock, and actually I've done a day of work, I've gone out and exercised, and I've achieved, and I'm like, okay, there we go. So it's, I mean, I can show you my rock that my mum made for me. It says one game at a time.
Oh, yes, that is brilliant. That's exactly it.
And then it says fuck it on the other side.
I mean, my favorite saying is, you can eat an elephant one mouthful at a time, and that's, I live by that.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
It's just one more mouthful.
Yeah.
Eventually, I don't care how long. And I think that's actually what having the kids we've got has really taught me, is that there's no time limit on anything. No. You just become who you need to become when you need to become them. You don't need, I mean, Cece's 17, she's an amazing, as you know, she's an amazing person. She brings so much to the world. She can't do maths. So what? She doesn't know numbers. She's beginning to read, and that's amazing. But there's a completely valid reason that she's on this planet, and she brings so much to people. So what if she can't do her maths? It doesn't matter, as long as we can keep her safe, and as long as somebody doesn't take advantage because of that. But that's fine. That's our job, and those around her always will be their job. But it really brought it home to me, and I cannot stand like face brag and the sort of the parenting. I've never had children that fell into the right categories to be on there. So I just absent myself from it. But I'm just far more about, well, actually, we had a really good time together. We just really enjoyed that, or we've gone and done that, and it's about our individual values. Other people will value different things, and other people will think that I'm bonkers for thinking like that. But I just think there's no point. You're only going to cause mental health problems if you try and force people to be other than they are, and that's the same if we do that to ourselves. So
clip that. That's it. That was that's perfect. That's exactly true. People, I think that's where the sum of so many people's issues come from, especially, and I think they do start at childhood, when they're trying to, you know, dad's trying to mold the son into what he wants them to be, or mum's trying to, you know, make them do this. And I think it's so difficult, and I'm very, very lucky that neither of my parents did that either. You know, my dad wanted me to go to uni a little bit more than my mum, but ultimately didn't care at all. He was like, well, as long as you find something you enjoy doing and stuff. My mum the whole time was like, go and be a bin man, and if you're happy, I don't care. No offense to any men any people out there who are bin men, like,
my mum was the same. My mum was always, and again, no offense to anyone who works in Tesco, but my mum was like, but there's always Tesco. It's fine. You can always get a job. Just as long as you can pay your bills, that's all that matters. Actually, I mean, I tell you, talking of dream jobs, we were in Chamonix recently skiing, and I went to the Decathlon mountain store. That is my dream job. That shop is I was just like, oh my God, this place is just so inspirational. All the sports you could do, all the kit, and all these people coming in and going off to do other sports. I was just like, do you know what? That's what I'm going to do when I retire. I
go and work
moved
in a
to
decathlon.
Chamonix to work there. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's a peaceful life, I imagine.
Oh, yeah.
So leading that on to mindful mechanics and the work you do there.
Mm.
Can you kind of, and again, I'll repeat what you said at the start of the podcast, where you said, it's about fixing your bike, but also realizing that by doing that, you're also fixing yourself. And I've never fixed a bike, but I imagine there's an awful lot of satisfaction with fixing anything,
Yeah.
or completing a task. So I can imagine it's very therapeutic. But can you go into how that all started and the from what I've seen, the community that you've built around it. And
Yeah.
explain all that to
Yeah.
me.
Yeah. So I think it's so basically, when people, there's a lot of fear, especially for women and
Mm,
some men as well. There's a lot of fear around mechanics. It seems like this whole mystical dark art, and literally when you say the word fear, you can feel your
mm,
breath ramping up and your shoulders are going up. Yeah. And you can start thinking, and so actually it's about learning that you can control those emotions, and you can actually learn to do that job. So you've not only learned to control your body and your mind, you've then begun to learn. And I always sort of say, look, just start with one thing. Again, I'm back to my one thing, aren't I? It's just like, just learn one job on your bike, come to me for an hour, I'll teach you one thing,
mm,
go away, practice it, get really comfortable with it, and then we can do the next one. And obviously, I mean, that's not practical for a lot of people to do 1 hour. So we do stuff, but I'm very much about small wins. Just
mm,
build them up. And it's about sort of, and then you, again, it's like any kind of feature or trick or whatever in our sports. If you've learned to do that one thing that you thought you couldn't do, the world's your oyster. How many
mm.
other things can you do that you
Yeah.
thought you couldn't do? It's sort of, and it is, and it's, so for me, it was sort of when I started, I'm fiercely independent, and I don't like being dependent on other people. So I wanted to understand. And again, a bit like when you're in your actual sport, when you're working on a bike, you have to focus on what you're doing.
Mm,
And you have to really think it through. You have to be very methodical, very logical. And it just totally takes you away from everything else. It's really calming, it's really mindful. So so it is, and just that sheer, that confidence of knowing that you've overcome something is
mm.
brilliant. I'm just going to let the dog out. There you go. That's it. Cece's care has just arrived,
Oh,
so
nice.
yeah. So it is very much, it's that sort of, and I trained in a bike shop. I love the communities around local bike shops. I'm really pro bike shops, but as a bike shop mechanic, there are tools that are really expensive that an individual mechanic can't necessarily buy,
Mm,
or doesn't want to buy. And actually, they tend to be really interesting jobs that local bike shops really want to do. So that's great. That's a win-win. You do the stuff you can do at your home. You can look after your bike, but then you can pass other stuff on. And for some people, it's literally just about choice.
mm.
It's empowering to know that if you want to do it, you can, and if you don't want to do it, fine.
Yeah.
There's nobody forcing you to do it, but just knowing, having that choice. And I suppose the final thing is just the independence. It's sort of, I remember as a youngster cycling and thinking, do you know what? I don't have to ask anyone else for a lift somewhere. I can just
Yeah.
cycle. And it is still, we live just off Route 1 of the National Cycle Network, and it goes all the way to Scotland. And I am so tempted to just come out my house, turn left and go to Scotland. One day I'll do it. One day I will. Al will be like, where is she? And you'll go to my Google location and go, how'd she get there?
She's in Scotland.
Yeah, I'm in Scotland. It goes through Innerleithen, one of my favourite places. It goes through Inners, and just that'd be so cool to just
Oh, I
cycle.
should do it. I imagine you'd find plenty of people that would want to come with you. I will.
Yeah,
I'll meet you in Scotland. I won't come on the bike, but yeah.
but you could bring Cece up for me.
Absolutely. I'm sure we can do that. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Although it looks like she's been cycling herself as well. But
Yeah,
how do you, as well as you kind of fixing it and things, and I want to dig it just a little bit more into the whole women side of it in extreme sports and things. And it's something I've talked about on the podcast a lot with pretty much, yeah, every female guest I've had on, this kind of thing has generally come up. Talking about this, and it can be such an intimidating space, and generally through just society and kind of culture, I guess, generally extreme sports, action sports are kind of still associated primarily with men, aren't they?
Yeah.
I think things have definitely changed, whether it's surfing in the last few years, the pay gap, women now get the same amount of prize money.
That's brilliant.
You see it, you're definitely seeing, even just like the brands, the campaigns and things are a lot, the advertising, the marketing is very different. There are a lot more women present, and it's not just women who look like supermodels either, who can't step on a surfboard or anything. There is a lot more going on and things. I don't really know anything about the mountain biking industry, but I do imagine that is the same thing in that industry.
Yeah, it's similar to that. I think from my own perspective, having grown up as a sailor, I felt comfortable. I've always had men as my friends. It never, and I feel sexy is the wrong word, but I feel my most attractive when I'm either covered in salt water and salty hair and I'm just sort of in shorts and a t-shirt, or likewise when I'm in mountain bike kit and I've been out and I can just feel myself glowing, and I'm not necessarily attractive for somebody else, but I'm attractive for me. I'm most in love with myself when I feel like that. For me, in terms of being able to reconnect with myself, getting myself into a place where I feel like that is brilliant. And I did very much, again, being a stay-at-home mum, I didn't have any, I had friends, I've got very good friends who are special needs mums, but as I've said other times, it's really hard. You are so trapped in your own world that you can't necessarily meet up, or you're too tired to meet up, or what have you. So finding a sport where I then made my own friendships was just amazing. And so, I'm about to go to Sedona in Arizona with my mate Tom, because we were meant to go and race in Africa, and then lockdown came and we managed to hold on to our flights, and flying to Arizona is the same price as South Africa, so it's cool. So we're going to Sedona in a few weeks, and that will be amazing. But he's one of my best friends. His wife doesn't ride, my husband doesn't ride, they're both perfectly happy. It's great. So on a personal level, I've never had a problem, and I think I actually enjoy quite male heavy environments. As a sport, yes, it's getting a lot better. I think my personal problem is that I feel some brands try and create women who are men, if you see what I mean, and they prioritize and promote the women who do the big gap jumps and the women who do this. And that is what I get really angry with. And actually, the reason I've chosen to ride a bike called Juliana, a brand called Juliana, is because, well, A, I love riding the bike, but B, I love the way they represent women. They represent women who look like me, who ride like me, who have similar, or feels like they have similar values to me. All their ambassadors, I'm lucky, some of them I do know, but I completely relate to these women. Nice. And so that's why I've put my money there. And that's what I think brands are missing, is that there is a lot of money out there. And yeah, there are some women who, for whatever reason, want to sort of mimic the way the men ride. And that's absolutely fine, because we're all different. But there is a big chunk of us who just want to be ourselves and ride what we like riding. And we don't give a toss about a 6-foot gap jump. But actually, we really like to see other women who are working, have kids, have a normal shaped body, who are, whatever. And it's, I think that's where I really feel that sort of me as a woman in her 40s, and eventually, as Henry keeps reminding me, sooner rather than later, going into my 50s, it's, I'm just like, actually, I want to see women who look like me and my age doing my kind of riding, because we can still go and have adventures. They don't have to look like. So yeah, I'm riding later this year. I'm going to ride around Mont Blanc with a few other friends. And again, I tried to get funding to make a film about it a few years ago, and people are like, well, everyone rides around Mont Blanc and it's like really common, and we've done it loads. It's like, yeah, but have you actually done women in their 40s who've taken this much time to coordinate all the stuff for their kids so that they could have 5 days away to go and do this. No, you haven't. You've just got some young person who does no responsibilities or is really fit and they can do it in 2 days or something. And I think that's the message that I'm very much trying to bring now, is that actually I don't want to see people who don't look like me, just like we need to bring in more black, brown, LGBTQ plus people. We need everyone, and disabled people, everyone needs to be able to see themselves in the media. We all do, and we're right. It's
it doesn't matter if it's the same adventure, it's still a different perspective on it. You know, completely.
It's I bet those people didn't get their son phoning them. I mean, I remember working at Meg Avalanche a few years ago, and I was in the middle of fixing this bike and so on, sort of up in Alpduez. Meg Avalanche is big downhill enduro style mountain bike race, where you literally go from the top of the glacier down. So I was working there, and I got a phone call from Henry going, "Mum, the dog's run away."
Yeah, what do you want me to do?
I'm up a mountain in the Alps. What am I going to do? You're going to have to find him.
Oh no.
And then like every 5 minutes I get Cece ringing, just going, "Just wanted to hear your voice, Mum." And it's like, yeah, okay. And we have to keep being mums. And that's what these other people don't have. I haven't got the luxury of just switching off everything, especially with the kids I've got. It's and I don't want to either, because I wouldn't be who I am without them. It's I think that's sort of, with my disability parenting hat on, that's the thing that I'm most passionate about saying, is that we become better people when we have disabilities and disabled people in our lives. Totally. So I think it's
that was fairly obvious, being in being in Dakla with you guys, and Cece kind of running around. And one thing I kind of noticed I think there was one day where I was just sort of sat in between windsurfing. I was just sort of sat on a beanbag with my headphones in, and I was just watching. And for anyone listening, Cece just goes and just talks to everyone and just has a chat. But everyone she went and spoke to, and like, there's also a thing, some people don't really know how to deal with disabled people as well. And also every disability is different as well. And so it's difficult, but Cece just approaches straight away, and there's no she's not nervous or anything like that. I think there's a lot we could all take from her. She's not nervous. She's not nervous about talking to anyone, where a lot of us who don't have any disabilities are terrified of talking to a stranger, But everybody she went and spoke to smiled and gave Cece their best self.
Yes.
They gave
so
Cece there. I sat and watched, and I was like, that's pretty cool. And part of me got me thinking, and this is maybe a bit airy fairy, but I was like, imagine if we did that with everyone. Imagine if we did do that. Imagine if that will never happen, because people get in bad moods, and people are allowed to be in bad moods, and people are allowed to be frustrated. But
and she gets in bad moods too.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. I'm absolutely sure, and I'm sure it must be difficult. And equally, we were in a holiday setting, so everyone is probably already quite relaxed and in a good mood anyway. If you're in the middle of a busy city, people might have a different reaction to Cece walking up and being like, "Hello."
But I mean, interestingly, the staff all do. It's I mean, what I've learned from watching her over the years is, I think what it is she assumes that everyone is going to be friendly to her. So she cuts away. We go in with our own insecurities and back to our negative thought patterns and that narrative. We carry that narrative with us. She just goes up and goes, "Hi, I'm Cece. What's your name? Where'd you come from? What's your favorite color?" And she just ignores all of that. And it's it is. And I mean, it's interesting, as she's getting older and misunderstanding things, there are definitely things that we're having to iron out now. But that basic principle of, I'm going to meet you on level playing field and just assume that you are going to like me, everyone does. And it's just, it's disarming. It's
there's definitely something to take from it, I think, is like you said, getting rid of these sort of notions straight away of like, what if they don't like me? Do you know what I mean? And actually, there's no reason why they won't.
No, exactly.
99% of us are all really nice people. We might get stressed sometimes, but generally everyone I always meet they're always really nice. As long as you're nice to them, they're nice to you, you know?
Exactly.
So yeah,
And
it,
that's, it's
there was something profound about, and again, it's one of those things that I perhaps didn't think about at the time, but thinking back to it now, I'm like, I do remember sitting watching that, and I was like, that's pretty cool. You know,
yeah,
the fact that she was just kind of bouncing around, speaking to everyone.
yeah. I mean, go on.
Something that I wanted to, well, moving on, something that I wanted to chat about just before we finished up, while we were, I'm sorry, I feel like we're bouncing around a little bit, but we were, when we were briefly talking about, you know, women and with the branding and things like that. I did a podcast a few months ago with some professional windsurfers, some of the girls.
Yes. Yes, I
Hella,
remember.
Hella, Sarah, and Elena. And you sent me a really great message about it that was really interesting. And I sent it to the girls, and they, you know, I think I can't remember if you guys commented about it.
Yeah. We did. We chatted afterwards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I talked to them about you know, they're all about kind of taking their sexuality back a little bit, and you know, they put up this kind of jokey post of all three of them topless, sitting on their windsurf boards, looking away from the camera, and they were like, if this gets 1,000 likes, we'll turn around or whatever. And I don't think they ever necessarily had any intention of doing that, but you know, it was just a bit of a joke and things like that. And then you sent a really interesting message about how that kind of rubbed you up the wrong way a little bit because of, and you something you said that actually I'm interested in, is you said because of the kind of generation you were from, the way that women were presented then, when they were, you know, not wearing many clothes and things, it was kind of very like objectifying Page 3, Nuts and Zoo magazine and things like that. Whereas now it's kind of changed a lot more, and the power is back in women's hands with stuff like that, you know, perhaps. Whereas before, I'm interested just to get a little bit about
it's, and it was really interesting, and I'm so glad that you asked them about it, and that then I went and chatted to them and so on. And I'm still not completely resolved on it, but so when I was a youngster, as I said, I grew up sailing. My dad worked in shipyards. I was in very, very male environments, but I was always aware that like the piece of cardboard on the wall that had the peanut bags in had a topless woman behind it. You'd go into the garage and their calendar was a topless calendar, or what have you. And I mean, obviously I was a child at that point, so I didn't feel people looking at me like that, but it obviously sat in there. And then my generation, we very much fought to get rid of Page 3 models, to get rid of the objectifying of women. And so when I saw the girls doing that, I was like, okay, if you had just said, here we are with our boobs out, fine. But it was the fact that they'd said, if we get this many likes, we'll turn around. So again, it was that transactional thing. Yeah. And it was really interesting, because when I chatted to them, I said, but what about those people who are getting off on that? Even though you're controlling it, are you comfortable with that? And they were like, actually, no, we hadn't thought of that. That's horrible. Because I think even though we've managed I mean, I really, really want to keep investigating this and working on it and trying to get to a thing. It's a bit like, if we're going to say, fine, okay, get your boobs out, what have you, women own their own bodies, which they do, 100% they do, then actually at what point do we say, well, it's fine for those F1 drivers to have scantily clad women next to them when they're on the podium? If those women have said, and why I find this really hard is I'm completely libertarian. I am pro legalized prostitution. I'm pro sort of legalized drugs. I'm really, and so that's where I've just got this real, but then I'm also this real conflict, because then also I know that I come from a generation where we didn't talk about periods. We definitely didn't talk about menopause. There's so many things that we didn't talk about. And actually I'm now raising my kids differently. It's just, I'm just really interested to see. I'll be really interested to see if I could come back in 50 years' time would it be totally different? Because it should just be, our bodies are our bodies. We should just be able to wear whatever we want, however we want. But I suppose it's the transactional side of it that makes me angry, and the fact that somebody else is potentially, where you've got people. I mean, I look at some accounts where women are mechanics, and the way they've dressed or positioned themselves, I just wonder whether there's something that says, hey, I'm a sexy looking woman and this is my bike and I can work on my bike. I don't know. That's me putting my own things onto them, but it's really interesting. It's the only way we're going to grow and develop and learn, is to actually talk about things. And
I think that's that's the biggest thing to take away from this. And what I loved so much, and one of the reasons why I really wanted to highlight in this, is that for people to take away from, like, if you don't agree with something on the internet that you see, and let's face it, you're not going to agree with it because everyone's on there, and most of the time people are on there trying to piss people off. Like, if you in this case, it wasn't that, it was the girls talking about their experience and their beliefs. But the way I love the way you dealt with it, in that you just asked rational questions and you were like, this is how I was brought up and this is how I think, but I understand that this is how they think. And then you guys engaged in a dialogue and talked about it. I'm like, it's so difficult. And I think it's an internet problem, and it's a social media problem, in that we as humans shouldn't be conversing with each other in this nature. Even the fact that we're sat here looking at it through a screen, this is as good as it gets without being like, actually together, But even then, people don't do that. It's people talking with 10 or 15 words to an anonymous other black screen with some more words on it that then comes back with a response. You're not actually sitting with the person and looking at them and, getting a discussion with it. So it can be so easy to just dismiss whatever they think. So I think, but
then I suppose, the flip side to that is that actually the brilliant thing is that because you had engaged with them in a sort of in the rational world of a podcast, and the really interesting, and I love podcasts because you learn and so on. I was then able to, I wouldn't necessarily come across them in my everyday life. I've been thinking about these things for a while, but I live in an echo chamber, because we all live in them. So actually it was brilliant. It was a chance for me, and actually that's where the internet's good, is because you're able to then create those connections and ask those questions. But yes, equally, likewise, I've been guilty of falling out over things because I've sent a text rather than actually picked up a phone and spoken to somebody. So it's we're all fallible. It's
I think we're all a work in progress, and the earlier we realize that, the better I think we're going to enjoy life. Realizing that actually, even if you do get to a certain age that I won't mention here, if you do get to that certain age, it's realizing, like, you've never completed it. And that's also the wonder of the sports we do, whether it's, for you mountain biking, for me windsurfing, and more recently Brazilian jiu-jitsu. You also never complete these sports either. There's never a point where you're like, I've completed it. You might get really, really good at it, and you might even win something one day. But you're never going to get to the point where you're like, right, I've done that. I've completed it. I can wash my hands and I can move on to something else. So once you realize that and you learn that from a sport, you can then take that into life and other things. I imagine you fixing bikes as well, right? You fixed your bike. At some point, the bike's going to break again. Something's going to break again, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah, totally. It's totally. And especially something so like indexing gears. So the gears, where the way the chain moves when you shift your gears on the bike is called indexing. Sorting that out is called indexing, and it's really intuitive. It's hugely intuitive, and it's one of the reasons why I think actually women are very well disposed to be mechanics, because it's about all your senses and hearing and so on. And it's and you can't just say, I do this, it's fine. And it is. I mean, I think, and the other thing I think I thought came to me while I was talking to you, I remember years ago seeing depression and anxiety as something I had to beat and I was going to recover from, and that was it. And in the last year, I mean, because like you say, I'm in a good place, and I've learned a lot of tools in the last sort of 4 years that I now use to manage my mental health. But a bit like I can't say I'm never going to get flu again, but I'm not a flu sufferer. And it's
Yeah.
sort of that I won't, that now I never say, well, I live with depression and anxiety, and it comes in waves, and I sort of, but just like I know to keep my immune system strong and not get, and try to avoid getting flu, I don't beat myself up when I get it.
No.
So it's exactly the same with our mental health. It's sort of, and I think the more we learn to just live with this ebb and flow in life, the easier it is to deal with it. Same with bikes. There's always going to be something to fix.
Yeah. There's always going to be something to fix, and realizing that that's okay. And as long as you've got systems in place, like you said, you literally you have tools to fix it.
Yes.
And then with your brain, they're not literal tools, or in some case they might be. It might be.
My bath is pretty literal.
Yeah, exactly. Your bath, my AirPods.
Yes.
I do that, and it's
totally. And they're preventative measures as well.
Yeah,
the
of
stuff
course.
you do. Yeah, completely.
Absolutely. Well,
completely.
I think that's a pretty lovely note to finish on there, Vicky. If people want to follow you, if people want to come to one of your sort of courses that you do, or if people want to come along go out for a ride with you, connect with you at any of the kind of festivals that you do and things like that, where can they find out about what you do?
Yeah, so my website is vickybikes.co.uk, and Instagram is probably the best place to find me, at Vicky Bikes. And if you want to learn any mechanics and not have a one-to-one lesson or whatever, that's absolutely fine. I've got a YouTube channel where you can start doing things at home. So again, that's Vicky Bikes, but it's all from the website.
Brilliant.
Just go and try.
Yeah, you'll be able to find that in the show notes as well, guys. Underneath the podcast on whatever platform, you can check out all the links there. You can also follow me on Instagram at the After Hours Lounge. I hope you all are already anyway. If you go to the link in my bio there, you can also donate to the podcast. That's right, I'm asking for your money. But I appreciate there's a cost of living crisis on. So actually just share the podcast into your story, share some of my posts, give me a follow. It all helps out massively. But if you do want to support, you can do that at the link in bio. I've also got some merch coming soon. So you can just buy a t-shirt instead with the new logo. Exactly. Make sure you check that out, guys. Thank you again to Vicky for coming on. And thank you very much, guys, for listening. We will see you for the next one.